welcome to the Wandering Creatives podcast. I'm your host, Ali Coots, and joining me on today's episode is Juan Carlos Duron-Martinez, which I probably did not say correctly. We'll let him say his name correctly here in a minute. Carlos is a local artist here in Wilson, North Carolina. Thanks so much for joining me.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to be on this episode. You did fantastic with the name, by the way. I know you felt a little bit nervous, probably not as nervous as I am during this podcast, but you did really well.
Oh, thank you. I was definitely worried about it. I always try to get people's names right, but you never know. Carlos and I were actually recording in Eyes on Main, which is a art gallery here in Wilson, in historic downtown Wilson.
On Goldsboro Street.
Thank you. I was like, which street are we on again? I was going to say the one that's next door.
Yeah, it could be a little bit...
Tarboro?
Tarboro.
Yeah, I almost said that. So if you happen to hear vehicle noises or anything like that, we are on one of the main streets in Wilson, and hopefully it just adds to the vibe of the podcast, a little vehicle ASMR for you in the background.
Some people are into that, right?
Yeah.
Car noises?
More car noises that you can listen to on your commute. It just adds to the whole scene you can paint in your mind. So Carlos and I, we actually connected through Amanda Duncan, who runs the Silky here in Wilson. And
amazing person, by the way.
She is so
nice.
And she was on episode 3, I want to say, of the podcast.
I think it was number 3.
I want to say, yeah. We talked about building her business and what that whole experience has been like. And she mentioned that I should interview you and get to know you because you're an amazing local artist. And we kind of I feel like we danced around each other for a little bit because I came into Eyes on Main and you weren't here that day, but I got to see your exhibit Breathing that was being shown.
Well, thank you. That was it's one of my children, so it was very special.
Yeah, it was beautiful.
All of my pieces are very special, but obviously to see them all together in one space and allowing people to view it is always hard, but very rewarding to make a connection with people. So
yeah, and I mean, I'm a huge fan of succulents, so I was like, oh yes, this is where I need to be, because it was just a very calming, peaceful kind of exhibit. So I got to see that, and then I ended up running into you at a different gallery event, and we finally managed to get on the pod.
It's been in the works a little bit.
Yeah.
Schedules are difficult nowadays. Well, also because I'm not a full-time artist.
Yes. Server by day and night.
Server by day and night, and artists everywhere in between. And I try to make more time for it. So just
it's hard, though.
What I can when I can.
I'm always insanely impressed by people that have full-time jobs.
Balancing.
Oh my God! I don't know how you guys do it. I can't do it. So I'm always very impressed.
Well, it's even the more I look into it, the more insight you get into the business side of the art world, you start to understand how hard it really is. Because sometimes I feel from an outsider's perspective, you will go into these spaces and you'll see everything laid out, and it's really nice to kind of just shop around or take in the experience of a show, but not everybody gets to see the behind the scenes of everything that goes into putting up an exhibit or sourcing people for your store to sell in retail, if that's what you do, or something like that. But
I've dipped my toe into retail and stuff. And there's a lot that goes into it, a lot more than you would think, honestly. And the thought of doing an exhibit, terrifying. I've always wanted to do a mixed art kind of photography and art, and also kind of I don't know how to explain it, a sensory exhibit of sorts with music and all kinds of stuff.
I've been looking into that sort of a show a lot lately. I'm really interested in multimedia. It's not something that I've played around with a lot, but for example, for my last show, I had a live plant wall exhibit of sorts. Yes. I had over 89 succulents, I want to say, displayed all on a wall. And that was part of a piece that I came up with. The whole general theme for my show was succulents, as far as like subjects and what you saw depicted in the actual paintings, but also for the installation. And there's a backstory about the actual meaning to those pieces. But to give a general idea,
Like,
most
I'm
of
like,
what you
please
saw
tell
was
us.
succulents. So yeah, I forgot where my train of thought was going.
Well, I have to say, I don't know what this says it's about me, but I was very impressed that the succulents were alive because I have a tendency to kill them, and they were like, some of them were big, had
Right.
I was
And
impressed
you know
by
what?
that,
I
too.
was pretty surprised to see that they were alive by the end of the show too, because this is obviously, well, I don't know if I would say obviously, because everybody doesn't know me that well, or people who are just coming onto the podcast and getting to know who I am. This is not something that I do on a daily basis. So this was a brand new idea. I've never worked with live plants as far as installations goes. For my first art exhibit, which was in the middle of a pandemic, it was on 2020, July 16th, I believe, was the actual date for the show. The name of that show was Healing, and one of the pieces in that show was an installation with 1,000 paper cranes.
Oh.
So obviously that's not an original idea. That's been done a couple times before. There's even like a book which kind of follows the storyline of this girl who has, I believe it's leukemia. She's like got leukemia from exposure to radiation from bombs that were dropped during the
Yes.
Hiroshima bombing.
I feel like that's right.
And so the storyline kind of follows her path and how she's like at the hospital and she's folding 1,000 paper cranes, because there's like this story behind the idea of folding 1,000 paper cranes and how you're granted like one wish or good health or good luck. And so she's hoping that by the end of this whole process, she's going to be able to get her wish or, like get better.
Yeah.
And there's a couple of like variations to the stories. Some stories say like she did finish the paper cranes, but she obviously did not make it.
Yeah.
Spoiler alert.
Turn back now if you don't know the story.
And other variations say she never finished the 1,000 paper cranes. And so there's actually an exhibit. I couldn't tell you exactly where the exhibit is. You could probably look it up online. But this class somewhere, they decided that they were going to start folding paper cranes to kind of like help complete her journey. And so all the students started folding paper cranes and they like shipped them off to, I think, her hometown or something, and they ended up displaying it. And so now there's like a whole place where people bring their 1,000 paper cranes that they folded, and they just kind of keep adding it to the collection. So anyways, relating back to why I included that piece in my show. I think the pandemic has been a very difficult time for everyone. It still is very difficult.
Oh, yeah.
It's definitely not what it was, but it's still difficult.
Yeah.
And at the time, I was going through a lot of things emotionally, and I felt like it was like a sliver of hope, right, to bring into the space. And I liked the way it kind of correlated with what was happening now and how her story relates to like a bad situation and making a wish. And so the completion of the installation is actually just like a wish for all this to kind of be over, for everybody to make it out all right, And so that was my first experience with installations. And so
What an amazing first exhibit too, to have it be like this wish coming true in multiple ways. Like,
right.
I got like goosebumps.
It's interesting to say that now, because so we didn't actually get to have a opening reception. Well, we had a reception, but we didn't get to have an artist talk. So I didn't go too deep into the meaning of the pieces, and I didn't actually get to give that explanation to people. Although we had a really great turnout. Thankfully, even in the middle of a pandemic, like the best that we could do, following all sorts of like
The protocols
safety
and
protocols. But it's kind of nice to be able to say it now.
Yeah. Well, and also I imagine like the process of folding all of the paper cranes in a way is kind of like healing on its own, like a little kind of like almost like a form of meditation.
Right. And I feel like our art creating is very much that a healing process, meditative process from beginning to end. It can be very stressful sometimes.
Oh, yeah.
I'm not going to lie, because sometimes you're thinking you're going to sit down and you're going to right off the bat create something that's amazing, especially when you just like feel super motivated to create something. But that's not always the case. Like sometimes you sit down and you might be bursting with ideas, but you just, there's like have the hardest time putting them down physically. Or sometimes when you start creating something, it doesn't turn out the way you expected it to. And that can be a little bit like discouraging at first. And I think in my personal experience, sometimes when I go to create and I have those experiences where I'm like, wow, this isn't turning out the best, because I feel like I also like am my greatest critic, right? So I want everything to be perfect. So then I like step away from the piece and I won't go back to it for a long period of time, because I feel like it almost makes me feel like I'm not a real artist at times. Like it's just that part of yourself that kind of beats yourself up. But
the self-confident. Well, and like you're a self-taught artist. Like you just, so was there like an aha moment where you were like, I'm going to do art? Like this is something I need to express myself. This is how I'm going to do it. Like, or were you just kind of always like a creative person and throughout your childhood? Or
I think I've always been drawn to the arts. I've always been a very creative kid. Like I have a huge imagination, always have had a huge imagination. When I was younger, I think my first interest was archaeology, just because I love dinosaurs.
I was an archaeologist.
Really?
Yeah. I went to school to be an archaeologist and did archaeology for many years.
That's amazing.
Oh my gosh, that's what. And you're also the second person who is a creative, like an artist, that has mentioned that they wanted to do archaeology. Whoa, well, wild.
It'd be interesting to see like what my life would be like if I actually had followed on a path like that, but obviously, with everything that's happened in my life, it's just kind of like you have no choice sometimes into what you fall into. But yes, from a young age, I was always really creative. And I think it wasn't until I probably moved to the States, because I was originally born in Mexico. And I was living there up until I was 8 years old. I had been here previously, but when I was 5 years old, we went back to Mexico, and my mother wanted me to go to school there and kind of learn more about my culture. And, you know, she wanted me to be able to speak Spanish as well. And so when I moved here, with the language barrier, I think art was just one of those things that it was like, it's kind of like math in a way, like, you don't need to be able to speak the language in order to understand math. And art is very much the same way, because it's like you can make a connection with anybody, no matter what ethnicity, language, sexuality, everything really. It's like art is just one of those things that brings people together. And
you gave me goosebumps again. Ooh, no, that's, oh my gosh, that is a beautiful way to look at art. That it doesn't matter what language you speak or where you're from. This episode of the Wandering Creatives podcast is sponsored by Coots Creations, branding and marketing for creatives by creatives. Coots Creations serves small businesses, entrepreneurs, and creatives throughout the country with branding, marketing, and social media management. We accomplish this by creating unique graphics, a cohesive visual brand, and content that tells your brand's story and builds trust with your customers. Visit cootscreations.com and book your free consultation today. Do you ever incorporate like your culture and your heritage into your art?
You know, that's an interesting question, because I don't think I've done that very much in the past, but also it's been difficult for me to identify with my own community in a lot of situations, because since I've spent some time over there, and also now I've lived most of my life over here. But growing up, it was almost like I was not enough for one side of the community, or wasn't enough for the other side of the community. So it was kind of hard to find a space for myself. And that's also like why I enjoy art so much, because again, art is its own community, and it just kind of welcomes all kinds of people from all over the place. But yes, I would say no, I haven't really had a lot of experience including a lot of my culture, but also because I feel like sometimes I feel I might not do it justice because I don't feel like I've been exposed to my own culture enough.
When you create, like for an exhibit or something, do you go into it already having in mind like what you want to show, or do you just start creating and then eventually you're like, oh, I have enough pieces, I can exhibit it? Or like, how does that process work for you? Now that you've
that's also an interesting question, because I feel like I tend to like self-sabotage myself with time management. So I feel like sometimes when the idea of presenting a show is brought up to you, you like obviously start to brainstorm, or maybe some people already have work that they worked on before. Obviously, if you're a full-time artist, you have more time to create pieces, so you might already have those pieces ready and already have an idea for what you're going to do for that specific exhibit. But the way my time works is an idea is presented to me and I brainstorm that over the next week or month or so, really, before I actually start to get an idea of what I want to do for the show. And I will say both of the shows that I've had, I think I've had maybe at least 6 months notice.
Oh, nice.
Before the actual exhibit, if not more, because my first show was actually supposed to happen in 2019, but that just kind of got pushed back with a lot of everything that happened. So yeah, no, the answer is no. I don't do a lot of planning. I'm not very good at planning. To be honest. It
probably allows you to be more creative too, to just kind of like flow with whatever is coming out.
In my experience with both the shows has been that I've started off with one concept for what I want to do. And it's changed at least 5 different times leading up until the show. And then I find that I have maybe 2 or 3 months to actually produce the pieces that I want to do at that point, because it's like, there's so many things that I'm interested in. And also, the last 2 times that I've exhibited, I've been so afraid to actually do what I want to do. I want to get more personal with my artwork. But also that just relates to my comfort with sharing with people.
Yeah, it's terrifying.
But also you have to find yourself in like the right mental place to actually do that. And the last 2 years have been pretty hard for me emotionally. I've worked through those things, and thankfully the last couple of months I've been in a really good place and doing a lot of things that I enjoy doing, but it's just been hard trying to do what you want to do when you're telling yourself it's not really time to do those things.
Yeah, you're not quite ready. Yeah, I think a lot of artists can definitely relate to that. My own personal experience, I guess, I recently published a book of poetry, which was like I was like, oh my God, here we go. Like I'm putting it out there. And it was, I guess, gender neutral or it was, I don't want to say genderless, but it was fluid as I am. And it was kind of the first time I was like putting that out there literally for like the entire world. And I was like, here we fucking go.
Right.
Like, we'll see how it goes. And yeah, it's really terrifying to put yourself out there for everyone. But it has been a really like awesome experience. And I felt so like free after
liberated.
Doing it. Yeah, I was like, oh, yes. Finally, like just getting everything out there and just living, life and being and creating what I want to create and how I want to create it. So it's definitely liberating. But yeah, I can also relate to you have to definitely be in the right kind of like mental space to be able to do that. So like with With your first exhibit, you were inspired by the story with the 1,000 cranes, and with your second one, breathing, with the succulents, like where does your inspiration come from? Is it just like seeing things or hearing things that kind of inspire you to create?
Well, I was going to mention sometimes my creative process works backwards in ways. Sometimes I look at something or I produce a piece of work and I observe it and I think about why I'm creating these pieces. As opposed to, because like I just said, I'm not very good at planning.
Yeah.
So I don't come up with a storyline prior to creating a lot of times. And so when I start creating, I look at the pieces that I'm making and I ask myself why I'm interested in these subjects and how do they relate to my life or my journey or what it is that I'm trying to kind of relate to the viewer. And so then the storyline just kind of comes after in my experience, which is still genuine, you know?
Yeah.
Like I'm not making up a narrative that's not true.
Yeah.
I'm just
very natural. Like,
creating and then asking myself why I created those pieces. And then I kind of relate it all back to that story.
that is so interesting. I feel like that is a good method maybe for folks that are, maybe they have like a block or something and because they're like, oh my gosh, I've got to I have an exhibit coming up or I've got to create, so I've got to come up with a storyline, and rather than doing it that way, just let it work. Because I think
it's kind of hard to follow one set of things. Well, one set of ideas, right? Especially sometimes you try to create around an idea, but visually or technically, it's just not that great. Yeah. And I just feel like that just relates to the idea not completely forming itself and not being ready to present that.
Yeah.
You know, so it's not that it's a bad idea or you shouldn't do those things. It's just not the right timing for that. And so I would say don't completely toss a concept. Yeah. Maybe file it away and revisit it later and see how you do then. And that's what I mean by not doing exactly what I want to do all the time, because I just feel like those concepts aren't ready. Yeah. Because I feel like sometimes when you're really emotionally attached to something or a certain story, you want to present it in a way that does it justice, right? And so sometimes you start creating and it's not representing it the way you want it to. Yes. And that's when I toss things out and I'm like, what, I'll do that later.
I have that all the time. But I really like it because essentially, you can kind of set parameters for yourself and put yourself in a creativity box, essentially, when you plan or try to do a storyline. And so it's in letting it flow. I interviewed an author recently, and she said that she just lets her characters speak to her, and she just writes. It just comes out, and she lets the characters go where they're going to go. And I feel like that's exactly the same thing with what you were saying. You just let the art take you where it's going to take you and flow with it, and in the end, you'll have something amazing.
Well, I also feel like that's kind of what I did for my first exhibit, because I had a hard time coming up with an actual theme. Well, actually, the first exhibit was supposed to be the succulent exhibit, because I do like succulents, and I could tell you how that relates in just a moment. But I decided to actually produce pieces that were a lot looser and not worry too much about creating perfect pieces of artwork. I mean, they were perfect in the end, but I was trying to allow myself to, kind of lose a little bit of control, because I feel like I can be a little bit controlling when it comes to my artwork, but I feel like it's one of the only things that I can control sometimes, with everything that's happening in life. And sometimes that's the nice thing about artwork, but also it can also be a bad thing. Yeah. So the first show, I allowed myself to create a little bit more freely. And so that's kind of how it relates to.
So, I mean, I need to know. I need to know why succulents, because I'm so curious.
So I think I've developed an interest in succulents during the last 3 years, I want to say I think it's been 3 years. And the important part about succulents, it's just one of my favorite plants right now, I would say. But also, it's not just the idea of a succulent, it's the idea of the time spent with my mother.
Oh.
And me and my mother, we don't get to spend as much time as we'd like to because she also works a full-time job. And so a lot of the times when we find ourselves together, it's kind of like in those in-between spaces or like coming and going situations. And so the nice thing about succulents relating to gardening. So I picked up a lot of gardening as a hobby as of lately because it's brought me closer to my mother. Oh. And so the whole show was a dedication to my mother and also my late grandmother who passed away. Just kind of like a thank you to them who have been extremely inspiring women to me. But also relating to the succulent wall, my grandmother, she used to have this huge plant wall in her home in Mexico. So her home was basically built kind of like in a U shape where all the rooms are attached. And then they have like this giant patio in the middle. And the walls that lined the patio of her home were all covered in plants. Oh, and so that's where the inspiration came for the actual plant wall. But the idea of the show is the time that I'm allowed to spend with my mother because we're both doing something that we love.
Yeah. Oh, right? I love that so much. I keep saying that, but I'm just like, oh. Like it hurts my heart. It's
but
just like it's beautiful though, and like.
So I want to create things that people like, right? And I think people like succulents.
I mean, I can speak only for myself, but I love succulents.
So I could have painted any other kind of plant or flower, but for this show, it was mainly succulents because me and my mother just kind of collect/hoard succulents at this point.
As you should. I also feel like, well, or maybe it was the way that they were, I'm losing my words, painted, right?
Yes.
Acrylic?
No, they are actually watercolors.
Watercolor. Okay. I was trying to go back in my brain and try to remember what they look like, and so maybe it was the way that you depicted them, but I don't know, maybe this is just my brain, but I see succulents as being very like soft and delicate, but also they're like hardy plants. Like they're super hard to kill.
Right.
I mean, I can kill them because I can kill everything, but so there's like that softness, but also kind of like an edge to them.
Right.
And so I thought, like, I enjoyed that about your artwork. So I enjoyed the show quite a bit.
Thank you.
Do you know what goes great with listening to podcasts? If you said a warm drink, you're absolutely right. Just imagine you're sitting back, you're listening to your favorite podcast, all while holding a nice, cute-ass mug in your hand with your favorite hot beverage in it. If you're wondering, where can I get a mug like that? Well, you're in luck. You can swing by the Coots Creations Cute Coffee and Tea Mugs Etsy shop. They've got everything from enamel coffee cups to travel mugs, all featuring adorable original artwork. Head over to etsy.com/shop/Coots Creations and use promo code WANDER for 10% off any mug. So what are some of, well, besides finding time to create and having to have a full-time job, what are some of the other kind of challenges that you've encountered as an artist, especially a self-taught artist?
Myself, I feel like I'm my own biggest challenge because initially I think you just have a lot of self-deprecating thoughts about creating and actually being an artist, because it took a long time for me to actually admit to myself that I was an artist.
Put the
I feel like
label
I'm
on
talking about myself like I'm an alcoholic. It's like it took a long time for me to actually admit to myself.
It's hard. Like it's
right.
I don't think people realize that for folks that, you know, like do have anxiety and imposter syndrome and have, you know, all of these doubts, like giving ourselves a label is terrifying and is so hard, because what if other people know that we're not that thing that we've labeled ourselves, or they doubt it, you know?
Well, I also consider myself very talented, but I feel like I'm allowed to say that now because I feel like I'm in a place where I believe it now. I believed it before, but I didn't feel comfortable believing it. And so, yeah, like I said, it's been difficult labeling myself an artist. And so that was one of the first challenges. Also, my second challenge I would say would be finding spaces where I could share the work, because I didn't exactly know where to start when I started. I was sharing a lot of my work with like my friends, or sometimes my friends would share my work with other people, and then those people would be like, "Oh wow, you're really talented. You should really show other people, or you should exhibit your work." And in my head, I'm like, well, yeah, but I don't know where. I don't know how to start. And what I would just encourage anybody who's looking to have an exhibit, is to just like research different gallery spaces near you. And I think one of my concerns initially was whether I actually needed a degree as an artist in order to exhibit, and that might very well be the case for some for some spaces. But what I've found is that's not really been a limit for me. I think mostly people are actually looking to exhibit work that expresses or relates to people.
I'm actually really curious about like you were saying, sharing your art. I actually I might bring you back to the podcast to do an episode on that, because I think sharing, what type of outreach did you do? Like, what type of research? How did you approach the galleries? Like, all of that information is insanely useful. So I might have to have you back. Just to go
So initially, I will say I wasn't doing a lot of outreach, but I just kind of found myself in the Wilson Arts. I don't know what I would even call it, but I will just say there's a lot of things happening in Wilson with the arts. There's so many galleries here now. So I think I came in the beginning of everything happening, which was really nice. And I was actually introduced by Alan Thomas Jr., who is a photography collector. And he was familiar with Dee Oliver, who's the visual arts director, I want to say is her label. Forgive me, Dee. Anyway, she curates the shows and sets up all the shows for Wilson Arts, or at the time they were the Wilson Arts Council. And so Thomas or Alan had introduced me to her, and I had shown her some of my work, and she was interested in me exhibiting. And so it just it's rolled off from that moment as far as like exposure and meeting new people. But also that it also relates to like my comfort with meeting people and actually putting myself out there and going out and talking to people, because things don't just happen out of the blue. I feel like if you're expecting to just be discovered one day, I feel like that'd be an ideal situation, but that's just not how things happen. So I feel like you have to go out there and present yourself and present your work, which I wasn't doing a lot of initially.
Did you ever do like craft markets or art fairs and stuff like that?
I've never done a craft market or an art fair.
Nice.
And I have thought about it a little bit more as of recently, but that's just because I was not familiar with
it's a fun crowd.
the concept of an art market, but I'm learning a little bit more about it, especially since I started following you, because you post so much useful information on your Instagram account. And so I've been researching a little bit and learning a little bit. I don't know that I'm quite ready to present myself at one.
Don't do it in the summer.
Don't do it in the summer.
It's too hot.
Okay, let me write that down.
I mean, it is brutal out there. Like, there have been times where I've almost just like killed over in the sun. It's so hot. But I also wanted to ask you, what was it about labeling yourself an artist that gave you pause before? Like, what was it about saying, hi, I'm Carlos, I'm an artist, this is what I do?
Insecurities. I feel like I used to be, still kind of am, sort of an insecure person. And so it just took a long time for me to feel secure in myself and the things that I'm doing and the work that I produce. And yeah, just being comfortable with saying that I'm doing enough, Not that I just want to be doing enough, but being comfortable with knowing that what I'm doing is enough.
Yeah.
Because I feel like artists tend to compare themselves to all these super famous, successful figures, and so it took a long time to learn to not compare myself to other people.
It is hard.
It's great to learn from other people.
Yes.
I would encourage people to learn from each other, but I would stray away from comparing yourself too much because that's hard.
I have one more question that I really am curious about. Your style, I guess, of artwork it varies. I've seen you've done painting. I just saw you do some chalk art that was freaking amazing. And so you kind of dabble, I don't know if I want to say dabble, you do all art, it feels like, right?
Right.
You do a little bit of everything. Do you feel like you have a specific style that flows throughout all of your artwork? Or do you feel like artists don't need to have a specific style or, a thing that they're known for?
I think from a marketing standpoint, it's important to have a distinguishable style if you're trying to market yourself. But I would say I don't have one specific style. I think I produce work that carries the same energy, and I've had a lot of people point that out to me. They say that immediately when they look at a piece, they know that it's mine. But I don't think I've grown into my own style yet, which is nice. Because because I feel like there's so much room for me to fall into one thing, but also I'm not looking to fall into one specific thing anytime soon because it's I feel like you almost kind of stop learning in a way if you fall into one thing specifically, right? And I do feel like I did that for a while with watercolors because I feel like I got so stuck trying to identify myself as a watercolor artist because it was something that I was good at. That I wasn't trying other things, other mediums. And so when I picked up chalk art, I immediately fell in love with it for one. And it was just kind of one of those things where it's well, now I've just kind of erased a whole part of my identity because it's now I have to market myself differently. I can't just be a watercolor artist. Right. And so when you go to my website, which is jcdmart.com, you will probably see something that says Juan Carlos Duron-Martinez, watercolor and mixed media artist. And so I think that opens it up a little bit to other things. And lately I played around with some pottery, I've worked with some clay. And the newest thing I picked up is I've been shooting some pictures, so I've been trying photography.
Good. It's so good. It made me, actually, I was creeping on your Instagram and seeing what you've been working on with the photography made me want to pick up my camera again because I hadn't done photography in a while, but I was oh my gosh.
Well, I have a huge appreciation for photography. Obviously, I work for a nonprofit organization which exhibits photographs from photographers from all over the world here in Wilson. But I'd never considered myself a photographer. But that also relates back to knowing technical things about a medium. I feel like sometimes people are scared to pick up something because the technical aspects of it hard to understand. You're fine. And so I feel like now that I've allowed myself to actually go out and shoot pictures without worrying about technicalities, not worrying about producing perfect images, that's been the greatest part about photography, aside from the work that I've produced. Because also, if you go online, you can see this project. It's untitled. It's a project where I initially set out to photograph my mother and kind of give her a sense of identity. But that was kind of like difficult because I was trying to figure out how to produce a good picture without worrying about producing a good picture, because that was what I was instructed to do in my workshop. But it was really great because it just kind of transformed into this project where I'm analyzing my mother's relationship with my own and how it relates back to us not spending enough time together. And then I talk about how I'm working towards making that time for my mother. I'm working towards being more affectionate with her, because I do feel like over time, me and my mother have lost touch in a way. And the pandemic has been hard during that process, because it's like, you want to be able to reach out to somebody and hug them physically, right? But it's like, I find myself worried about hugging my mother sometimes because you don't know with exposure and things like that.
Exactly.
But also, there's a lot of other things relating to the divide, but you can read about that on my website.
I might have to check out
for my workshop presentation. I actually made a book. I never expected I was going to make a book, not an actual book, but like a dummy. That was really nice. It was really nice presenting that to her.
I think those were some of the photos that I saw on your Instagram. I was like, oh my gosh, like this makes me want to.
So that was actually a workshop that I did through Eyes on Main Street, which is that nonprofit organization that I'm a part of. You can go online at eyesonmainstreetwilson.com, and they offer different lectures and programs that you're able to take. Like, the information is all up there. There's a kids photography program that they've been doing for a while. I know we're looking to work with The Spot, kind of like get a group of kids together and put some cameras in their hands and let them go out there and shoot. And we actually exhibit some of those photographs in the gallery at different times during the festival, which the festival that Eyes on Main Street puts up happens annually. This was the 7th edition, which is currently up. It will be up until near the end of March, I want to say. I can't remember right off the top of my head, but...
And when you say the exhibit, or the 7th edition, we're talking, there are photos throughout Wilson, like downtown.
Right, so the organization does this photography festival where they exhibit 100 images by photographers from all over the world, all over the country, and those used to be up for 100 days. So now they're up for 150 days. But yes, they all line the streets of downtown Wilson. It's just kind of like a way to get people to get down here.
It's a beautiful place.
Revitalize the downtown Wilson area.
Yeah. And listeners, I'll not only include Carlos's information in the episode description, but I'll also drop Eyes on Main website and their socials in the description as well, so that you can find them and make it a little easier. Highly recommend checking it out. Come stroll through downtown Wilson and just enjoy it.
There's a lot of really awesome spots down here.
I'm always surprised.
I would recommend going. Obviously,
always surprised.
One of your podcasts is about Amanda, the Selkie.
Yes. Go to the Selkie.
You have to go to the Selkie. You have to go to Iconostar.
Yep.
You have to go to the Edge, and
so many good places.
Absolutely, you have to go to the new Wilson Arts Building because it's amazing.
I've not been there.
There's a lot of awesome places down here. There's a place called.
Constantly surprised because I live outside of Wilson, so when I come here, I'm always like, oh my gosh, look at down, because I feel like there's new things like every time I come here. So
well, the craziest thing, I just want to say one more thing, and I've heard this so much from other artists coming into Wilson, is that they felt that in other cities, they haven't quite felt like the art community has been very open. And so everybody always kind of raves about how welcoming the art community is here. So I don't know, if you're looking for a space that's welcoming, to what you're doing, I would
Yes.
recommend coming to Wilson and checking it
I
out.
feel like I can attest to this. Like, I'm not fully in the art community yet, but that's mainly because of my own like antisocial like I'm a hermit, but everyone I have met has been insanely nice. Everyone is like, it's a very much community. Like, how can we help you do what you want to do, and like, how can we work together? And so it's been, yeah. I came out of like my COVID hibernation and like ventured out into Wilson. And I was like, oh my God, this community is amazing.
Right.
So I will second everything you just said.
Well, I want to thank you, obviously, for giving me this opportunity for one, but also for creating this podcast, which I want to say has been so helpful for me, and I'm sure it'll be very helpful to other artists, new and experienced. There's a lot of really helpful information up here. Every artist, sorry, the cars are... See, even the cars are excited.
Cruising the streets.
If you don't know about the Wandering Creatives podcast,
Oh, thank you.
I feel like you should know.
That makes
you
me
should
so
share
happy.
it.
That is literally my goal, is
Share it to all your artist friends.
to help creatives and you know, do what they want, live the lives they want through their creativity. So it makes me happy to hear that. Are you working on anything right now that you can share? You got any shows coming up?
I have not actually planned for any shows, and that's just because I'm trying to make more time for other things in my life.
Yes.
That doesn't mean I'm not being creative, because I'm constantly working on different projects, but I'm not working on any shows, and I haven't picked up any new projects. So I'm kind of like at a space where I'm finalizing all the responsibilities that I have left, and I want to give myself some time in between now and my next exhibit, which I don't know where it will be or when it will be, but it's just going back to, I want to have the show that I wanted to have 2 years ago, right?
Yes.
And I feel like the time is finally getting to the place where it's like,
Now we can do it.
I feel like I'm at a point where I can do it now.
That's exciting.
So it's going to take a lot of vulnerability.
I'm so excited.
Is what I will say. I will say I have thought of the name for the new show, but I won't tell you now. So, but the concept is there.
Oh my gosh, I will keep my eyes out, because I'm like super excited for you. So people can go to your website, jcdmart.com. Where else can folks find you?
Well, they can find me on Instagram at jcdmart. That's my art handle. And I also have a personal account that's jc.duron. They can follow me there as well. And you could probably friend me on Facebook, but if I'm being honest, I probably won't friend you unless we've met one time before. But I'm a pretty friendly person, so who knows?
Amazing.
You can reach out to me at any given time on Instagram. I feel like that's the easiest place to find me.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Carlos, I cannot thank you enough for being on the podcast. Like, I've been looking forward to recording with you for a while, and I would definitely love to have you on for another episode sometime.
I would love to be back on a second episode. Yay. I feel like the second time around might be easier, because podcast is not something that I'm used to doing.
It's not too hard though, right? Like, it wasn't terrible. Thank you again. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on. Listeners, I also want to thank you for tuning in to this week's episode. Be sure to like, rate, and review the podcast. If you have questions or comments for me or for any of my guests, including Carlos, you can text or call us on our hotline, 252-419-6004, and we will answer your questions on a future episode of the podcast. You can also follow us on Instagram at wandering_creative_ and check out our website, cootscreations.com. This has been a Coots Creations production. Follow the show on Instagram at wandering_creative_ and on Twitter at wandering_pod. For more information, go to cootscreations.com. Like, rate, review, and subscribe. To sponsor the Wandering Creatives podcast, visit www.cootscreations.com/podcast-sponsorship-opportunities. You can also click the link in the episode description below. To be a guest or a featured maker on the podcast, Click the link in our Instagram bio or contact us at cootscreationsllc@gmail.com.